Hello, hello, welcome to AMAZE Live. I am so delighted to have Dr. Gail Saltz on today. Hello.
Hello, it's delightful to be with you.
Yes, this is so delightful. I know about you, and you've done such incredible work, and you have such a sort of crazy, prolific career that you've developed, which I will link in our comments after we get going. But I would love to get started. As you know, we just launched last week AMAZE Junior, which are resources for parents of young kids, ages 4 to 9. And just to sort of, as we get people into the live broadcast, I just wanted to step back and have you talk about you for a minute. You are the author of a just truly fascinating collection of adult-facing, grown-up books, but you also have 2 children's books that you came out with, was it a decade ago? I mean, several years ago.
Yeah.
So you have Amazing You, Getting Smart About Your Private Parts, and then Changing You, A Guide to Body Changes and Sexuality. And I'm curious, and I'd love for you to share with our followers kind of like what inspired those 2 books amidst your breadth of work.
Well, I'm actually really passionate about this topic, about education, sex education, sexuality education, and children. And partially that came from the fact that I've been in practice for 26 years, and I see a tremendous number of people who really struggle with feeling good about their bodies, feeling good about their sexual lives, whatever they may be. And I often find that a lot of the root of that has to do with things that went on very early in their lives in terms of the messaging that they received, the education they received, the feeling states that they received about their bodies and about sexuality. And it's really a lot of work to undo when something hasn't gone well. And I think all of the data point to the importance of parents' roles when it comes to how a child will view their body and how they will feel about it throughout their lives, really.
Yeah, so Amazing You came first, right? And then
basically, I felt like this was really important. And at the time, I was a very frequent contributor for the Today Show, a mental health contributor, and did a series on the show in the morning about talking with your kid about their bodies and sexuality and birds and bees. And I went through 3 days of young, middle, and older kids. And actually a publisher called me and said, oh, there's really a dearth of this tool for parents. So please, we'd love it if you would do a book with us. So that bore out the beginning of this and Amazing You. And then I had planned to do, because I think these 2 age groups, sort of very young and then middle, middle school, middle-aged, is also pre-puberty and into puberty, very important time, and 2 different messages going on. So that begat those projects. And I have been, to be honest with you, I knew that it was needed, but I've been stunned at the notes that I've received over the year. First of all, how incredibly popular the book is. It's actually hilarious how many parents write me like, this is my child's favorite book. They asked me to read it every night. Thanks a lot, but actually, children have tremendous curiosity. And if you are open about it, they really want to understand this information and they like it. So those notes and notes from parents saying, thank you. Like, I am really uncomfortable about this and it's been really hard and this made it really much easier, and I see the world of questioning that it's opened up for my child, whether this be, and particularly actually interestingly, I've heard from a lot of parents of children with special needs who are like, I felt even more nervous about how to talk about this stuff and how my child would process this information and helping them to process it, and this has been really a godsend. So it's been really gratifying. And I continue to feel, I love what you guys do, because I really am a champion of any way that you can, as a parent, be the first one in, and that's important, to be the educator for your child about this information, the better.
Right. So I'm curious, that is awesome. And I'm curious about if you have gotten any, in the past over the years, if you've received any pushback about your titles, because, this is kind of Where Do Babies Come From week over here at AMAZE. And, one of the comments I was just responding to today was somebody who said, are you kidding me? I'm not going to use, my kid is 4 years old. I'm not going to use words like vagina around them. We need to let kids be kids, which I thought was very interesting. And I, made a response back. But, I'd be curious about, your thoughts on that, and if you've had pushback and how you've handled that.
Absolutely. There will always be, and I've learned this from all of the arenas that I tackle, there will always be people who feel differently and who are uncomfortable. And as I said, my practice has been filled with people who are uncomfortable themselves, or had parents who were uncomfortable, or came from maybe religious schooling or backgrounds where, it was sort of a taboo topic, etc. So I'm not surprised. Of course, there are people who are going to be uncomfortable, who think that being young and maintaining, let's say, what they would call, appropriate innocence, has to do with not even naming the parts. I would argue that's because for them, the names of the parts have embedded a shame in them. And to me, this is part of the problem. There is nothing inherently evil or bad or even sexual about the word vagina. It is a body part. It serves many purposes. It's an important body part. It can be a great source of pride presented in that way. And, the problem is that adults are thinking of what the word means to them now as adults, which is laden with all kinds of things that children don't think about. And if you present it as simply that, like, this is a body part like other body parts, but this is the correct anatomical name for it. It has many functions. It's great that you, as a biological girl, have one. And, other thoughts that are positive. You're promoting accurate clinical and body positivity. If you say, well, we dare not name that part, we're going to call it something else because that name has a very negative connotation, then you've planted that seed, I think, of shame and that feeling. And everybody wants their daughter ultimately, right, to grow into a woman who feels good about all of herself. And to me, given what I know about this area, and I would argue as a professional, I do know a lot. It really behooves you to help yourself to be comfortable and with the definition of those terms, and to recognize that uncomfortable feelings you have about those terms don't have to be transmitted to your child because the term doesn't inherently mean that.
Right. I'm just going to take a second here. This is all awesome and so interesting. And I just want to encourage people who are live on the broadcast now, or if you're coming to it later, we have lots of people who come to these lives later. So just drop a comment if you have one for Dr. Saltz. We'll be happy to put her on the spot for you if you have a question, or I will try to get her in here later if it's after the live. So, your last comments were just making me think about a question that I think many parents sometimes have, is that, so say you're ready to dive in, okay, and you've been using, words like wee or whatever, different kinds of words like that. What would you say to a parent who feels like, it's too late? I've already established this. Like, how can I do this now? What would you say to them?
It's never too late. It's always better to correct at any point, because, I often try to make this point. The reality is that as your child enters school and makes reference to her wee or her hoo or whatever you might have named it, you're actually opening her up to some mocking, or to some, we don't know what you're talking about. And that actually isn't really great for her. or for him for that matter, whatever we might be talking about. And so at any point being able to say, you know, we've been calling it this, but the correct anatomical term for this is this. And that's not a big deal. And I would always advocate for revamping. I mean, if you can start with the correct term, that's obviously the best, but there is no harm in at any point saying, actually, we were calling it this because you were so little, but really, this is the word.
That's a great pivot. I just wanted to share a nice comment. Sorry, it's going to obliterate our faces for a second, from Lindsay. Great conversation. Just love hearing her talk. As a parent of young children and a public school health education teacher, this is right up my alley. Thank you. Yay, public health teachers. Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, you are, we are bowing down. So, I want to, get back to this, the question of where do babies come from? I think it's such a funny thing to me, because I think it is probably one of the most common questions that, a child will ask a parent, yet it continues to be just this source of unbelievable paralysis. I see it from my friends. I see it from what we do here at AMAZE. So I would just love to hear if you've got a couple of top tips for parents, both parent facing from this, in the sense of how do I get over my fear of addressing this, and then what do I actually say?
Sure. So first of all, this is the most normal of all questions. So you should expect that you will hear this question. And so to some degree, I say, prepare for this question. There's no reason to be caught off guard if you just know in some form or another, this question is coming. It may not be, where do babies come from? It might be, I've had children, see a tampon commercial and, that makes them ask something. Children see animals mating and say, what's going on here? Are they fighting? What's happening here? There are just so many potential stimulus that make kids question what's going on. So it's a normal question. Of course, most commonly, it may be that a child hears they're getting a sibling and is like, well, how did that happen? Again, a completely normal question, but some form first of this. And so you sort of want to be open to, in whatever form this question might come, to know that it's normal, and to know that when your child's asking it, again, they're not asking what you're thinking. The problem that usually stuns parents and makes them frozen and immobile is they're thinking their child is saying, tell me about sex. And that is probably not what your child is asking. They are truly asking, and this is my first tip, ask what they're asking. So when your child says, where do babies come from? You can say, well, tell me more about that question. What do you mean? Because chances are what they're asking is, where in the body does a baby grow?
Right.
Or how did a baby start growing in there in the first place? So usually, and this is actually the book Amazing You, and the reason I separated these two books out, is the first book is for very young children because it does not include intercourse. Mm-hmm. It is purely about the idea that a sperm meets an egg, creates an embryo, which implants in a uterus, which is where a baby grows, and it comes out most often, but not always, a vagina. Mm-hmm. So, basically, there's a lot more to it, obviously, but it's about your body parts. It's what they're called. It's about the idea that your body is something to feel good about. And look at this, it procreates. How awesomely awesome is that? Which we all would agree is pretty awesome.
It is pretty awesome.
And magical. And it has to do with, two people. And this is where you can assert your own values, deeply care about each other, are married, whatever your values, it leaves you open to reflect on your own value about that. And to some children, the idea that a baby, right, could come out of vagina is kind of scary. Sure. It's scary to a lot of women too. But so it gives you a chance to talk about the fact that this is normal, that vaginas stretch very big and they go back to their size before, and things that make it less scary seeming because they're true. The idea that bodies are private and no one else should touch your body, but it's okay for you to touch your body. And, you know, things that open up conversations about consent, and protecting oneself and private parts, and where private parts are private, and, you know, you can appreciate them yourself, and how normal that is. But basically, when a child says, where do babies come from? They're asking something. And the question for you is to ask them back, what are they asking? And to answer that question truthfully, that's second number tip. Don't make up stories. Do not say something about storks and cabbage patches or whatever it might be, because the reality is that you want to be the trusted source for your child. You want your child to know that they can come to you no matter what, with any question, and you're going to give them the truth, and they can count on you for that, so that when somebody says something at school and it sounds a little weird to them, and probably it is, they can come back and ask you about it. And when they're uncomfortable about something, they can come back and ask you about that. You want to be that source of information, right? You don't want them to learn on the playground things that you probably don't want them to learn, or that's misinformation, or things that could get them in trouble. And you want them to be able to trust that you're giving them the truth, because if they think you're making up stories, they aren't going to come ask you anything. So that's very important. And ideally, you'd like to get in there and give them the truth before somebody else gives them whatever their version of the truth is. So if you do that early enough, then you're probably the source. And that's a great thing.
Yeah.
If a child then at some point goes from, you've told them, you know, a sperm meets an egg and an embryo and where it grows, and they go away, and someday they come back and they say, well, if sperms are in testicles and eggs are in ovaries, how exactly does a sperm get to an egg? That is a child that is asking you to explain intercourse. And they have given you sort of the developmental level that they are at, which people always say, what age, but kids develop at different rates. And so it's important to meet them where their developmental mind is, and they are cluing you in. You know, sometimes when they say, where did Johnny, the baby, come from? They aren't asking you where babies come from. They're asking you, are they from Chicago or from Florida? Like, you want to find out, where are they? What question are they asking? But usually the question, if a sperm is over here and an egg is over there, then how did they meet each other, is a clue that they're ready to hear about sexual intercourse.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought up the thing about age and variability, because obviously, you know, individual differences like exist. And also, I think your comment just now really makes me think there's sort of a continual mindfulness that needs to be in play as you listen and as you parent, because how you think of your kid, you know, might not accelerate at the same rate that their own thought process and their curiosity does. So it's interesting to me. I think I'm pulling away from this, that you need to continue to be flexible and open and keep your mind open. And also I wanted to point out, you sort of touched on this, especially when you mentioned consent, and my ears always perk up, is, you know, we've had a lot of people say, especially around consent, oh my gosh, are you crazy? I can't talk to my kid about consent. You know, that, like, they haven't even talked to them about sex. How do you expect me to talk to a 4-year-old about that? And, you know, I think one of the best lessons I've learned from this work is that it's so many of these topics, you don't even have to talk about sex. You know, it's more just, it's bodily autonomy. It's like whether you need to give so-and-so a hug or not. And I think that that's been so game changing. And, you know, I don't know if you have any thoughts to add on to that, but that's, I think, one of the best lessons, that really it's never too early, because if you start talking too big, it's going to go over their head, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, particularly, you know, girls are often people pleasers. And, you know, we as adults tell daughters often to, you know, if an adult, whatever, then you do it. And so it's really important to make a distinction that, you know, your body, it does not fit under that rubric, you know, and your affections or being touched, you know, you don't have to do that. That is yours, and consent isn't again, right, it's not about talking to an older person about you're on a date or something like that. It is about your private body, and that only with your wish, comfort, appropriateness do you give permission, and otherwise you say no, and you tell me, or you tell someone you feel comfortable telling that has been requested.
Yes. I just have a comment from Lindsay, and she says, I think consent is the most important lesson to teach kids early on. I'll pop this up here so you can see it. All about asking permission to touch, hug, hold hands, etc., and being assertive enough to say no. So yeah, that's exactly what we were doing.
It's very normal for children to ask other children to play some form of doctor. I mean, this is like incredibly common, and it doesn't mean that child is a bad child in any way. It means that child is like normally curious. However, it is appropriate for every child to also be able to say to another child, no, I don't want to do that. No. And to some degree, it's important. It's part of the reason I say that, I mean, sure, children might want to go off and play in private, but depending on their age, there's a certain amount of open door policy and being able to check in and so on that a parent should have, because this is normal and because kids are curious. And not that you would make them feel bad for doing it, but that you would say to them, this is just not appropriate play for you two at this age.
Right.
It's not. And then parent might ask me, well, why is that? Because really it is stimulating. Children, when I say this, I know some parents are going to get upset. Children are sexual beings, which doesn't mean that they're thinking about having sex with another person. Right. Or even need to know about that at a very young age. But they are sexual creatures, meaning they have pleasurable feelings in their bodies, and they have pleasurable feelings in their sexual parts or their genitals, and that is normal. And so they can feel stimulated, not in the same way an adult can, but they can. And you don't actually want them to get basically overstimulated with no place to go, so to speak. And so it's better to, sort of say, not like that is forbidden and shameful, but because you don't want to make kids feel bad about their curiosity or bad about their whatever desire they have, but you do want to limit and say, hey, you can touch your own body, that's fine. But, you at this age, you're not touching somebody else's body, and somebody else isn't touching yours.
Right. Wow. What a good point. I hadn't even thought of that, the sort of energy channeling. So I need to be mindful of your time, and we probably need to wrap up, though I feel like I could talk to you all day. But do you have any, closing thoughts or anything we didn't get to regarding, answering this question, where do babies come from, or just talking in general to young kids about sex ed topics?
Well, I think we're entering some more challenging times, which is everybody being tolerant and accepting of the many different kinds of ways people have babies, family types that exist, and the impact that this will have on our conversations, and how important it is you don't want to shame your own child, you don't want to shame other children, and you don't want other children shaming your child or vice versa. So the more that we're able to, and I say this because I think it's really helpful for parents to have this conversation with themselves and with each other about these topics before they even hit the first conversation with their child. So if you're uncomfortable, frankly, get a book and read the book before you read it to your child. Like, get comfortable with the words on your own. Get comfortable with, masturbation and, things that you might be like, oh, no. Get comfortable that it's okay to mention that word and talk about it. And say to your child, that's okay to do, but you do it in a private place, in your room, etc. So being able to be comfortable with yourself so that you can appear comfortable and not like you're going to keel over with your child goes a long way. And I think that's true not only of these subjects, which have always been sort of front and center, but also I think increasingly the topics that have to do with the fact that there are so many different ways to accomplish love and procreation and family.
Oh, I'm sorry. We just lost Dr. Saltz, which is a little tragic because she was just closing out some amazing commentary. But thank you so much for joining us for AMAZE Live. And oh, I think she's coming back. I think we just lost you for a moment, Dr. Saltz. No worries, no worries.
That was sort of, you know, just there are all kinds of ways to think about this and to allow yourself and your child to be somewhat open to that, even as you impart your value system.
Yeah, I think that is the perfect closing point, that, you know, we sort of have to level up as grown-ups, you know, first, and, you know, that's the best way to get started. So I cannot thank you enough for your time and for sharing your expertise with our community. Again, if you come to this broadcast later and you have questions, just leave them in the comments. But meanwhile, thank you so much, Dr. Saltz. It was such a pleasure to talk to you today.
A pleasure being with you all.
All right, take care.
Thanks.